Okay. Hello. Afternoon, evening, good day, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for tuning in to today's live podcast. Obviously, yesterday there was some technical issues with uploading videos, so there's been no content for a couple of days, which meant that I was not able to do my thoughts on the Berry and Bolton situations, but we'll answer them obviously in this podcast today. What we saw yesterday was a mess with Berry going out the football, getting kicked out of the Football League, and Bolton given a 14-day extension to find a solution to avoid liquidation and expulsion from the Football League. Now, the Berry situation, it turns out, was easily avoidable. What has transpired and been released to the media is that there were three other interested takeover bids that were tabled by 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and the EFL weren't interested. They wanted to force through the C and N sport analytics deal. And they pulled out because there were so many issues in such a short space of time to resolve that it was not feasible to resolve them. There's issues about the rental of the car park, the stadium, all the debts. And what is even worse is that fans were busy preparing the stadium. Tickets were printed for this weekend's game. And the EFL have admitted that they are going to have an investigation into why the situation got to the state it did. But the issue with Berry goes back years, 6-7 years of mismanagement, poor governance, and that includes by the EFL and the FA, and a whole host of other issues, overspend, overpaying for players. And this comes back to another issue about the cost of football at this time, is that players are asking for more and more money that is just not sustainable by the sport. And you have to go and think to yourself, how long can football sustain the wages at all levels? It's not just at the League One, League Two level. It's at all levels of the sport. How long can things be sustained? And how long can how long can it be sustainable? Because at the end of the day, with the amount of money in the game, it's very top heavy. And as I said in previous videos, I use the analogy of a building. And the analogy I use is that a building is 92 stories. It's a skyscraper. It's an office block. It's a big skyscraper in a big city. And you take two of those stories out, be it Berry and Bolton in this case, and the building will collapse. There's too much money floating around the game at the top level and not enough at the lower level. And I think this is the beginning of a trend with clubs having financial problems going forward. I think what we've seen in the last month with Berry and Bolton, or Bolton goes back to last season as well. What we've seen in recent months with a whole host of clubs, more than just Bolton and Berry, is that there are issues with the financial structures of football. There's issues with the governance of the sport by the FA downwards, and that includes the Premier League, and that includes the EFL. They're now mentioning we might put a salary cap in. I think it's a little bit late for that. I think with the salaries that players are demanding now, it's just not feasible. The damage has been done. And, we could go back to 1992 with Maidstone United and Aldershot Town being the last clubs to fail to complete a Football League season. We go back as far as Accrington Stanley in 1962 getting expelled from the Football League for financial difficulties. There's been an issue with football and money for quite some time. We've seen a whole host of other clubs come close to the brink. We've seen some clubs fall out of the Football League via relegation who have since gone bust and had to reform. And we've obviously seen it in Scotland with Gretna going out of business and having to reform outside of the Scottish League system. We've seen it with Rangers having to reform at the lowest level. We've seen it with a whole host of other Scottish clubs as well. And this is not just a British problem. This problem also is prevalent in continental Europe, clubs going out of business quite regularly. Parma in Italy being a prime example of a club that's had precarious financial situation for years. Siena is another club in Italy that's disappeared off the map. And this is an ongoing issue that's just not going away. And until the governing bodies of football can come together and get their heads around a table and say, we're going to have to put a salary cap in and restrict player wages, no action is going to get taken. It's all fine, virtue signalling, gesturing. But at the end of the day, the EFL has admitted they're going to investigate and they're considering a salary cap, but it's too late for that. It's too late. Does that cover only up to the Championship? What about the Premier League? It makes no sense, really, to have waited this long. Other sports have had salary caps for decades, in some form or another. We know that financial fair play doesn't work, and the fit of proper persons test has been criticised as well, very publicly, on some media platforms by some. And if you look at social media, the reaction from the majority of fans is negative. Let's just say, is a polite way of saying, towards the FA, EFL, and Premier League. There's a lot of angry finger pointing without necessarily the full facts, but a lot of fans have started to run out of patience with the governing bodies and the players for demanding such extortionate wages. You have to go back to let's say 1992, so the late 80s, early 90s. The average salary for a player per year was around £50,000 to £70,000 per year. Now the average salary in the Premier League is that per week. And this is where I think the complete and overinflation of player salaries at all levels is prevalent. And part of that is to do with the Sky TV deal that's been in place since 1992. A lot of fans are less than enamoured with Sky and the way they covered yesterday's events with Bolton and Bury, with the countdown clock. It's not as if it's transfer deadline day now, is it? But it was treated as such, and such contempt and such lazy reporting has angered a lot of people. But the ongoing issue is that the Bury situation was avoidable. The Bolton situation was avoidable. Had financial fair play, even in its weak, hopeless form as it currently is, being enforced to some extent, the clubs would not have been allowed to run up such massive debts, but it wasn't. The fit and proper persons test. Steve Dale bought the club at Bury, that is, for £1. Ken Anderson's got a fraud conviction. That's the Bolton owner. How the hell were they allowed to run a football club? The EFL has to consider possibly bringing in a compulsory purchase scheme, whereby they buy the club, for example, a club in trouble, and find a suitable buyer at a later date, and make sure the clubs can continue running and operating while under the EFL or FA ownership. I think that is a solution that is on the table. Clearly, the EFL are murmuring towards having a salary cap, as I say, but what is proof fruitless is football seems to be the only major global sport that globally doesn't have a salary cap. Certain leagues do, but it's at a local level. It's not at an international level. And this disparity is causing a lot of problems in continental Europe. There's been meetings with UEFA from various league dignitaries saying that we're risking our clubs going bust because only certain clubs and certain leagues can afford the top talent, and other leagues and other clubs can't compete financially because they just can't afford to spend what other clubs are spending. There has to be some kind of cap limit on spending or transfer limit or whatever. But there needs to be more transparency. And throughout this whole sorry saga at Bury and at Bolton and a whole host of other clubs, there's a lack of transparency, which is deeply concerning, deeply worrying. And there has been this issue for quite some time. Well, I don't want to spend the whole live stream podcast, for how long we stay on here, discussing what's happened in Greater Manchester. It's going to take up a lot of questions. I understand that there's a lot of people who have a vested interest, and it'll be interesting to see what questions come our way this evening. But from what I gather and the information that's been made available, the deal to buy Bury collapsed because these prospective buyers realised that 3 to 4 days over a bank holiday weekend, there was far too much to digest, really, to take on board and look at and structure. And the EFL wanted this deal done over a bank holiday weekend, which is just complete and utter suicide. It's not feasible, considering that you're going to have to get auditors in, you're going to have to get accountants, legal teams, write up legal documents. There is no way a company, takeover, which is basically what it would have been, can be completed in 32 hours over a bank holiday weekend. That is just not feasible. I also find it funny that Bolton have been given an extension of 14 days, and they're on the verge of liquidation. It's reported that the deal that collapsed over the weekend is sort of back in the pipeline, but questions have to be asked of the EFL and the FA. A lot of people involved in the sport are starting to question how the game is governed and the oversight and the rules in place. And a hell of a lot of fans have basically said, look, enough's enough. We know the fit and proper persons test is not fit for purpose. We know financial fair play is not fit for purpose. And it's a little bit late to say we'll bring in a salary cap now. And we'll learn lessons now, because these lessons should never had to have been learnt had the FA, Football League, and the Premier League basically kept their eye on the boil. You know, they're willing to give Peter Scudamore £250,000 each from each Premier League club for his retirement fund, but they can't seem to sum up the money as a collective, as a sport, to save two historical clubs that compete between them have over 250 years worth of history between them. If you add all their histories together, the years they've existed, that says to me something's wrong. The money in the sport is crippling the sport. Cricket's going the same way. Rugby union, rugby league, they're all starting to head in the same direction, and a lot of that is to do with the TV deals with Sky, BT, and Amazon. A lot of people are not overly enamoured with subscription sport TV. There's a lot of sports that, if, as for example, Sky with their future restructuring under Comcast, could be massively affected by any change to the current TV deal that's been agreed. BT Sports hemorrhaging money. Amazon decided to declare a profit for tax so they can get some TV rights for the Premier League in the next TV package. People aren't happy. Fans are feeling priced out. Fans are feeling let down, and they have a point. A standard Sky package doesn't contain Sky Sports. You have to pay a secondary fee on top of that, and so that doubles down your money, and it's a lot of money. And BT Sports a lot of money as well. Premier Sports is one of the cheaper providers, and it has actually has the free sports channel with it, and that's the fastest growing sports network. And I do honestly believe at some point Premier Sports may decide to go completely free to air. We'll have to wait and see, but they're growing rapidly. It's available in all households, or at least it's eligible for all households. And you have to remember, like, a third or nearly a third to a half of all households in this country don't have a Sky Sport or BT Sports subscription. They refuse or just cannot afford. And this is something I think that the sport of football especially, but other sports as well, have failed to realise over the last decade, is real wages actually haven't grown. The average fan is actually worse off now than what he was in 2008, 2009. A lot has happened in the last decade, and a lot of clubs have hit the financial wall in the last decade, yet for some reason football keeps making stupid sums of money. The player wages are too high. The transfer market is sickeningly overinflated at this point. And it's something that's deeply concerning, but other sports are heading the same direction, and we're seeing crowd numbers drop in the lower leagues in football. We're seeing crowd numbers drop in rugby league. Cricket's had issues with attendances, and while Sky have announced their biggest ever viewership figures for that third test at Headingley on the final day, the viewership figures were higher when they had the World Cup final live on free-to-air TV with Channel 4. I think shared broadcast rights is the way to go. If you want to go with the Sky Sports or BT Sport package, you should be able to have that choice to go free-to-air or otherwise. F1's now in a position where it's behind a paywall on BT Sport, MotoGP, the Superbikes on Eurosport, which is no longer free-to-air. It's now a subscription-only service. Sports fans are starting to have enough of being taken for this ride, and the greed of the sports concern is a big talking point about how much money they have in these sports. Yet sports teams and leagues are struggling financially, and there are issues with governance and transparency. So it's a bigger issue than just football. But what's happened at Bury and Bolton, there's some specifics. Now, while the situations are both different for both clubs, the end game is basically the same. But Bury are out the Football League now, and the earliest they can reapply is 2020, 2021. So 2 seasons, 2 years, 2 seasons time. The earliest they can reapply to re-enter the Football League. Bolton, they have 14 days before they end up in the same position, if not out of business entirely, with liquidation. Troubling times. Now, I'm open to your questions, and there are a few other sports that I want to discuss, like tennis. Nick Kyrgios has come out and alleged that the ATP are corrupt, so he's come out with another fiery press conference, which is going to get him into a lot of trouble. It's Nick Kyrgios. What do you expect from the firebrand that is Australia's most hated sportsman? Steve Smith is going to be fit for the fourth test in this Ashes series. Okay, the All pre-season. Well, I'm going to say this. We already basically the European ice hockey season is actually starting this weekend, and that may sound completely bizarre to a North American, but the elite league clubs that are in the Continental Hockey League, which is basically the ice hockey version of the Football Champions League, their first game is Cardiff Devils' first game is Friday, so 2 days time. So professional regular season hockey is already upon us here in Europe. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on with ice hockey at the moment. The Kuznetsov suspension is the biggest talking point. Obviously, Cam Ward's retired today. He signed his 1-day contract with the Carolina Hurricanes, so he's retiring today. The Oilers is an interesting one because Jesse Puljujärvi has gone back to Finland with a clause in his contract, which means he can go back to the Oilers should they either trade his rights or give him game time by the 1st of December. But that's an interesting one. That another one of their high draft picks is not working out. Is it on Puljujärvi? He wants to play, just doesn't want to play for Edmonton. That says to me there's a culture issue in the Edmonton dressing room. I think there's a culture issue with that organisation. I mean, I will have to do a Stanley Cup prediction, I suppose. I hate predictions, but I'm going to look at which teams are most likely to win the Stanley Cup this year. But yeah, the NHL season doesn't start till October, but the European ice hockey regular seasons start within the next couple of weeks. It depends on which league, but they're kicking off their campaigns as early as this weekend. Depends on the team and the competition, because the European season is completely structured completely differently to the NHL. We have domestic and European Cup competitions as well. But it is interesting that Jesse Puljujärvi has gone back to Finland to Liga to play. Oh yeah, I mean literally. But while the Elite League preseason has been going on since early mid-August, so it is interesting that yes, professional hockey is back, but it's just how it is. It's just how they get the fixtures in. The regular season is shorter, so they can have these cup competitions. It just is how it is. European sport is really like this. A lot of European sports leagues start end of August, beginning of September, and finish April, May time. So the way that it's like European sports culture is some professional sports have already started their seasons. So if you look at what you would call soccer, what we call football over here, the season's already a month in. If you look at rugby union, we've got the World Cup coming up in Japan in a few weeks' time. So the delay of the season has taken place so the World Cup can take place. There are some calling for the next World Cup brought forward a few weeks, but the Rugby World Cup, technically the rugby season is upon us in that sense. The Rugby League season, however, is different. It takes place between February and October. And in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia, it takes place between March and late September, October. But there's a lot of sports are starting their professional league seasons now. It does sound crazy, but it is how it is. It's how it's fixtured. The NHL is different, and the affiliate leagues are different because you don't have those cup competitions that would flesh out the fixture list because you already have an 82 game schedule. Whereas here in Europe, we have these continental cup competitions and domestic cup competitions as well in the various countries and leagues, which flesh out the schedule a little bit to make it roughly equivalent to an NHL season. But it is how it is. It's a traditional thing that we start end of August, beginning of September. It's as far as I can remember going back. I think the earliest we started a league season. I think the earliest we started a pre-season in the league that my team play in was third week of August. So there is precedent for playing ice hockey in August professionally. It's a thing. Whether the NHL looks at changing how it does its pre-season and when the start date is another thing entirely. Whether the NHL wants to move the start of the season forward slightly or things like that, that's up for the NHL to decide what to do. But traditionally the NHL starts in October. It will be interesting to see if they do move the start date forward a couple of weeks to the middle of September, but that's neither here nor there. That could be up for discussion with the upcoming CBA, and that could be one of the discussion points in those meetings between the NHLPA and the league, and looking at how long the preseason should be. There's a whole host of issues, minor issues that will be on the discussion table. We know that some of the bigger issues like escrow, which I've done a video on, by the way, which is up on the channel, and a few other issues are more pressing at this time. But things like the season start date, the length of preseason, player welfare, player pensions, healthcare, a whole variety of minor issues are in there. But that's up for the players' union and the league to discuss at the end of the day, which is something that gets overlooked is the start date of the regular season of the NHL. I know it's a traditional thing, but it's not out of the realms of possibility that they do move the start date of the season forward a week or two. It's a possibility. I think it would make logical sense to mirror it up with the European leagues by having a September start date. On the Oilers side of things, with Puljujärvi going back to Finland, that says to me he wants to play. Well, it's obviously clearly a sporting culture thing. Over here in Europe, we're used to regular seasons starting in August and September for rugby and football and ice hockey. It must be more of a cultural thing. I understand why the NHL start in October. I do. And I understand why they have that slightly later finish date with the Stanley Cup, whereas the seasons over here have been done by a month. So it sort of works out the seasons are the same amount of time. Just one starts a month earlier than the other, and one finishes a month earlier than the other. That's the basic difference. But there are other things on the NHL discussion table with the NHLPA. I mean, Olympic participation is a sticking point that a lot of players weren't happy about when the NHL announced that they weren't letting players go to the last Olympics. There were several players very vocal about that decision by the NHL to not allow players to play in South Korea at the Olympics last year. That was a big sticking point with a lot of players. Erik Karlsson was one. Alexander Ovechkin was another. They were very open in their dislike of that decision and how they wanted to play for their country. But they have the opportunity to play at the World Championships depending on how well their teams do in the regular season, which is a surprising thing. It's basically very rare that in the World Championships, or if they were to go to the Olympics, that you can actually pull out a Canadian or a Russian or a US strongest roster, because obviously the NHL players. Whereas if you look at teams like the Scandinavian teams, Germany, the UK, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, countries like that, not all their best players play in the NHL. So you get a stronger squad available for the World Championships and the Olympics. Whereas with the NHL side of things, you're not always going to get the best players on the ice at the same time. But we'll see what happens. I think there's a lot in the NHLPA, CBA discussions and the NHL discussions. We know the opt-out dates are coming up in the next few weeks in September. But I can't see a lockout happening. I think there's too much to risk there. And we've got Seattle joining in a couple of years. We've had the success of Vegas, whatever people think of Vegas with that fan base and how the team's been doing. And I think the NHL knows that the NHLPA are in a much stronger bargaining position than what they were in the previous lockouts and strikes. It's ice hockey is a sport that needs to sort out its labour disputes. But because it is a bad PR image for a sport that wants to be taken more seriously and wants to grow and wants to get a better TV deal in the US, especially. And this is what holds it back is the unrest between the players and the league. I think the unrest is less now. I think more of the discussing points are over escrow and a few other bits and pieces around player contracts. The Olympics is a big discussion point as well. But there's the players are getting paid more than they ever have. The teams are making more money than they ever have, so the owners are wealthier. The league as a whole is making more money. It doesn't suit either party to have a lockout or a strike. It suits no one in the NHL to have a labour dispute because it does more damage now than what it would have done 10, 20 years ago, I think. neither side wants it really. There's no winners if how, as you would say, a lockout or a strike or any kind of labour unrest, if that was to happen. I think the fans would more likely vote with their feet in their wallets this time. I think, yeah, the Jesse Puyarvi thing. I think he wants to play. I think he's requested a trade, and Edmonton haven't found a willing trade partner. I think the lower salary cap has a part to play in that, but Edmonton, with their history of failing to develop prospects, it says to me it's more of a team failure than the player failure. I think that says more about the organisation than the player. He wants to play. He's gone back to Finland to play. There's a clause in his contract that says that he can come back to the NHL before December the 1st. It'll be interesting to see what the Oilers organisation do. They've clearly failed to trade him. He's signed a 1-year contract in Finland. After that, is he a free agent? Is he still his rights still part of the Oilers organisation? We'll see what happens with Jesse Puljujarvi. I think he's been badly handled by the organisation. Whether he could have done better in himself is a question that, in the fullness of time, will be answered. But it does say a lot about the Edmonton organisation with the amount of prospects that they've drafted really well, and it hasn't quite worked out. They're good at drafting it, then it's developing those players. Question marks will have to be asked of their AHL and ECIHL affiliates as well, but the whole organisation from top to bottom. I think there is an issue in Edmonton. Whether you think there's an issue there or not is it's an opinion. But Connor McDavid, Nugent Hopkins, and Leon Draisaitl notwithstanding, Ryan Hall's gone. Or Taylor Hall, not Ryan Hall. Ryan Hall's a rugby league player. Taylor Hall's gone to the New Jersey Devils, and while he was injured for most of last season, his first season in New Jersey, he played really, really well. He played much better than he had done in Edmonton for a long time. Nail Yakupov is another one that sort of his NHL career sort of fizzled out. But questions will be asked about the Oilers organisation as a whole. Will it hurt the chemistry? I don't know. Is it a happy dressing room? Is another question. I think there are some problems within the organisation. I don't think he's on the player. He's not the first high draft, as I'll call it, high draft, good draft pick to not materialise for Edmonton. Whereas you look at what happened to Taylor Hall when he went to the New Jersey Devils, he had a resurgence and he played really, really well 2 seasons ago, which helped them get to the playoffs. It hurt New Jersey, him being injured for most of last year. So you can definitely see that there is a pattern here. Several players have gone on and been traded to other teams and then actually improved. So it does say to me there is a chemistry issue in that locker room. Could it be McDavid? There's too much attention on McDavid. Nugent Hopkins and Draisaitl are both equally capable, and they both can produce points. If you lose Nugent Hopkins and Draisaitl, then the team are in real trouble, and that includes injury, suspension, anything like that. The team are in real trouble. Then I think giving McDavid the captaincy was a mistake. I'm not a big fan of giving the star player the captaincy. You need a guy who's a solid player who commands respect. And if you give a star player the captaincy, I think it can weigh them down with that extra responsibility. You want your best players to go out there and play, and you want your leaders to go out there and lead. But time will tell. I think when certain players' careers are over and they do their biographies and autobiographies and they give interviews and they discuss their highs and lows, a lot will come out about the Edmonton organisation since 1990. I think there's a lot to come out about what happens behind closed doors up in Alberta, because a team with such a successful period in the 80s into the 90s, and I mean that they got to the Stanley Cup final, I think. What is it? With Ryan Smith in the side, but even so, their lack of playoff success is telling, and their lack of development of young up-and-coming prospects who have a good high ceiling is telling as well. No, Yakupov notwithstanding, because I think he was overrated when he was drafted, but the fact that you've lost Puljujarvi, the fact that Taylor Hall's gone, it says something about not necessarily the drafting, but the development side. And you could say that about a lot of organisations in a lot of sports. And while it does hurt, the negative press surrounding that and the off ice dramas with the backroom, the front office and what happened with Shirelli and how he was handled and some of the contracts that were signed, some of the trades and the coaching changes. Is it solely on the coach or is it also on the players? Is there something wrong in that dressing room or is it a wider organisational problem? And I think that's something that's going to be an ongoing theme with looking at the Oilers as an outside in. It's going to have to take someone from inside that organisation to open up and be honest about what's going on there because something is not right at all. And this is a long-standing issue that's been going on for years of underachievement, poor development of prospects, struggling to get to playoffs. Even when they do get there, they don't. I think I don't know. Something's not right in that dressing room, but something's not right in that organisation as a whole. And you could argue that about a lot of sports teams. The New York Mets, for example, they're just lighting themselves on fire. You go to Australia, the Newcastle Knights, they've just sacked. The coach was said he was, was told he was leaving at the end of the season, and they were going to have a new coach come in, and now he's out of a job with 2 games to spare before the end of the season. So there are some organisations that do have a really poor track record when it comes to a variety of issues, and that does include front room staff, back room player development, the general feel around an organisation. We're seeing it here in English football. We're seeing a lot of clubs where you have to look at what's going on within that organisation. Manchester United's a prime example of a team where there's clearly an unhappy aura around the whole club and the whole team ethic and what's going on. But it's something interesting. We'll have to see what happens with Puljärvi in Finland, whether the Edmonton Oilers will call him back and offer him a chance to play, whether they do actually trade his rights to another NHL team, or whether they just allow his rights to lapse. He becomes a free agent in the summer after his stint in Finland, and we'll see where it goes from there. I think there is a risk of his talent being wasted, but at the same time, he wants to play, and I think he's made that quite clear. He wants to play. He also wants to leave the Edmonton organisation. It's now up to Edmonton to find a willing trade partner or allow him to go his own way, I think. It tells a lot when a player says, I want to play, but I don't want to play here. Is it going to be a matter of time when players get drafted that they refuse to play in Edmonton? We've had it before with Detroit back in the 70s and the 80s. A lot of players were drafted by Detroit, didn't want to play there. It could become an unfashionable location to play at because it doesn't matter if you've got McDavid, Draisaitl, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins there, who are 3 really good players. You could argue is McDavid the greatest player in the league right now, but is it going to get to a point where players who get drafted by an organisation such as the Oilers will say, I don't want to play there, trade my rights? Could they have dealt with the Puljärvi situation better? Absolutely. Has that been mishandled? You bet. The whole situation's been mishandled, I think. But why are the EFL useless? Well, now we're getting back to European problems. The EFL, the woman in charge now, who only took over at the beginning of this season, ironically, she's been thrown into I forget her name, the current acting head. But no, the EFL, I mean, you could look at the fact that the fit and proper persons test for owning a football team is a joke. It's not fit for purpose. The financial fair play rules aren't fit for purpose. And they're now talking about having a salary cap in place. Well, surely that the financial fair play is sort of a spending cap anyway. You could argue that the EFL needs a complete investigation to themselves. If you've got the Minister for Sport coming out and saying that this shouldn't have happened, that tells you a lot about the situation. I think the EFL, much like the FA and the Premier League, they all have a lot of questions to answer about the governance of the sport. The TV rights deal is sickening. Sky Sports, I have a view on Sky Sports, killing football since 1992 and ripping off fans in the process. I think it's unsustainable because wages are unsustainable. There need to be a salary cap in the 90s. It's I think that the damage has been done, and I'm not sure that players, the Professional Football Association, the PFA, will sign off on a salary cap. That could lead to a player strike. I think we have to look at yeah, the TV deal, I think it's wrong. I think there should be shared rights between free to air and subscription TV. Yeah, we get the FA Cup and internationals, and that's about it. And even then, they're eroding the international rights. Questions have to be asked about why there's so much money in the game, yet we couldn't save Bury, and we may not be able to save Bolton. It's the first time an FA Cup winner has gone out of business. Um, it doesn't, but it does, because if you put it on commercial free to air, there's advertising revenue, and you get a bigger audience. This is what I think the the uh, the FA, Premier League, and EFL are failing to realise is if you have shared rights, if you have commercial free to air like ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, you can get a bigger audience because it's available to all, and it's commercial because they're relying on ad money. And if the bigger the audience, the more ads get shown, and the more that advertisers want to use that channel to advertise. There's a reason why the Champions League and Europa League were on ITV and Channel 5 at one point. There was a reason why, England's home games were on ITV. They've worked out there is an audience there. The issue is the clubs have got too greedy. The players have got too greedy. This is where a salary cap is too little, too late. I think it's virtue signaling now. It's just pretending to care. I think what's gone wrong is so many sports, Sky Sports, if they just go right, we're not gonna bid for TV rights. Teams are on their knees. Cricket will be on its knees. The ECB, the reason why they're forcing the 100 down our throats is because basically they're beholden to Sky. Sky calls the tune for cricket in this country now. It's no surprise that the Cricket World Cup final, if they didn't put that on free-to-air TV, the outrage would have been huge. Sky want to keep, a positive vibe going here, but in reality, the dislike towards subscription TV is growing. The greed of the sport is killing it. Is the basic principle here. Oh no, it's more than that. We're talking billions. The football TV rights deal is billions. Billions. The top Premier League clubs, all the Premier League clubs could let us in for free and still make money. Or at the minimum of £5 or a tenner for tickets. And you have to look at the price of Premier League tickets. Considering the TV deals they've got and they've had, it's not acceptable. Fans are being mugged off at the turnstile, let alone with the subscription. Amazon Prime, yeah, but that's the only reason why Amazon declared a profit for the 1 year in their existence was to get that TV deal. beIN Sports, they own PSG, so that's a conflict of interest. The owner of PSG is cousins with the guy who owns beIN Sport. That's a massive conflict of interest. There's corruption in the rights game. Let's just say that. There's still a TV package for the Premier League that's gone unsold. I'm surprised a company like Channel 5, Channel 4 or ITV haven't tried to get their hands on it. We were told that when the Premier League and Sky Sports were, in '92, football will benefit massively. The only people who've benefited are the players and the agents, and some clubs, not all. Not all the clubs have benefited. And now what we're seeing is that there's been no salary cap. So player salaries are obscene, utterly obscene. And player transfers are a overinflated obscenity as well. And the agents' fees, there's no transparency with the agents' fees and how agents work. Be it an independent agent who just represents a couple of players, or a massive sports agency. There's a lack of transparency there. And look at the corruption allegations with football since the rise of subscription TV. Big problem. Oh yeah, people do need to be kind of happy what happened to Bury. The issue is the Bury situation, much like Bolton, has been an ongoing issue for years. It didn't happen in the last 6-7 months. This has been going on for 6-7 years. They were close to going out of business in 2012. So this has been going on for a long, long time. Bolton's been going on for a long, long time. This is where the fit and proper persons test it hasn't worked, because they've allowed previous ownership to get the clubs racked with debt, and the new owners to be unscrupulous and asset strip. And what happened to Bury is wrong, because at the 5 o'clock deadline, there were 3 other bids on the table. The fact the EFL only gave, over a bank holiday weekend, 4 days, which in reality is like a day and a half, in order to get a deal done, is a joke. It's unfeasible. It doesn't work. You can't, buy out a company, which is basically what a football club is these days. It's a company in 32 hours over a bank holiday weekend. It does not work. The legal paperwork will be a fudge. There won't be due diligence and checks done. And I do believe the prospective buyers were right to pull out of that deal. They should have asked for an extension that they gave Bolton. How Bolton got an extra extension, I have no idea, because we were told as fans that 5 p.m., that's it, deadline. Bolton have got a 2-week extension. The fact that also the EFL were aware of CNN, I think it is CNN, I think that's the company name, Sports Risk or whatever they're called. They put a bid in 11 weeks ago. They had interest in Bury 11 weeks ago, before the season even started. That CVA was avoidable. Steve Dale should not have been allowed to buy that football club for £1 in 2018. That is something that boggles my mind. This is not Ken Bates and Chelsea back in the 7th. This is a serious thing. Bolton, Ken Anderson's got a fraud conviction. He's allowed to own a football club. At the end of the day, there's a whole host of other clubs that have owners who shouldn't own the football clubs. And I'm a Blackburn fan, and I can tell you the Venky's have no business in football. They have not a clue what they're doing. We're racked with debt. It's because they have their own other company that they can keep pumping money in. But no, we are in trouble. We've been asset stripped as well. The fact that we've sort of bounced back to a point and have stabilised somewhat is okay, but we shouldn't be in the position of dropping into League One. That shouldn't have happened. There are clubs in the Premier League, and I will mention Manchester United and Chelsea, that if they were standalone clubs without their ownership, as they currently are, they would be in the same situation as Bolton and Bury are right now, and they're Premier League clubs. The debt that the Glazers brought in, it's unbelievable. The guy who's bought Pompey, we don't know who he is, and we don't know where the money's coming from, but bearing in mind this is a club that was owned by Milan Mandaric, and a lot of about £70 million just disappeared into a black hole, which is the same amount of money, prize money and TV money they got from entering the Europa League and winning the FA Cup. It's the same amount of money that Maraxi disappeared overnight into a bank account named after Harry Redknapp's dog. Pompey have been, having issues for over a decade. And the collapse of Setanta shows that if a TV company does go tits up, clubs suffer. Yes, it's Scottish football that suffered more with the collapse of Setanta, but it does show that if BT Sport keeps hemorrhaging money, and if Sky decide to turn off the lights, football's dead. This is why I think free-to-air companies have to come in and step up and say that we'll take some of the rights. We'll show a minimum number of games per season, one of each club, home game. Each club gets a home game shown live free-to-air, or something like that. Shared rights. It's a no-brainer, because in the lower leagues, fans switching out. They're not interested. Attendances are much lower now than what they were 15, 20 years ago. There's too many clubs for fans. There's not enough people who want to invest in football anymore. The smaller clubs can't compete for reach that the bigger clubs can, and they don't have the money. Whereas other sports may have smaller reach financially, they seem to do better with interacting with the fan base, fans turning up week on week. And I'm an ice hockey fan, and I've only missed, I think, 7 games in 3 years. It's affordable, it's accessible, and the experience is a much better experience. And the second tier of ice hockey in this country is not on TV like the Elite League. It's a much better experience for a match night. It's more family friendly. It's cheaper. It's accessible. The replica jerseys aren't that expensive. There's interaction between the team owners and the supporters club and regular fans. They have outreach programs in the community that don't cost a fortune. Football needs to learn from other sports to be more accessible and more affordable. And if the TV money is there, why is it not being shared evenly? Setanta, they just overextended themselves. Basically, ESPN hit a brick wall, and a TV rights deal was put forward. They overextended themselves. Not enough people bought the Setanta subscription. They were expecting loads of people would want to buy Setanta. They had a really poor coverage of games. They had the wrong package for the wrong clubs, the wrong leagues. No one at that time was interested in the various leagues they had the rights for. It's a complicated story, but basically they overextended themselves. They didn't get the viewership that was expected. they collapsed. They'd signed an agreement with the SPFA and the SPL. That collapsed. Basically, they got the TV packages that Sky didn't want. BT then come along and pick up what was Setanta's slot. And they got all the crap that Sky didn't want. And BT, guess what? Are hemorrhaging money. BT are losing money. BT Sport is losing money daily. Absolutely daily. It's lost hundreds of millions of pounds since it was, brought along. And BT Sport was meant to be free to wear as well. And they realised no one was watching it. So they put it on subscription. Even less people watch it. So BT Sport's losing money. They've overreached themselves. They've lost a lot of TV rights as well. How long the BT group of companies, that includes BT Mobile, EE, and all this other and internet, can keep propping up a failing business model, who knows? But Setanta is based like, yeah, BT Sport's been losing money since day one. As a BT customer, as my family are, we were meant to have it free, straight away. It was meant to be free to wear to all, and then it was meant to be free to all BT customers, and then it was meant to be free, and people weren't picking up the offer. People didn't want it. They already had enough of paying for Sky, and this is why Premier Sports has grown to 2 channels plus free sports. They've picked up a lot of what BT Sports lost. They picked up Serie A games. They've picked up Europa and Champions League qualifying games. BT Sport is losing rights. Sky Sports, they've lost some rights. Amazon Prime, I'm not a fan of Amazon really, but the Amazon Prime deal is not as good as people think it is for the TV rights. You're only going to be able to watch 2 games. Out of the games that they've bought, they all clashed all over the Boxing Day weekend. And that means you're only going to be able to watch 2 games. So you're paying for that for 2 games. Setanta, overextended. Setanta are still going in Ireland, but they're not going in the UK. They overextended themselves and people just not pick it up. ESPN got bought out by BT. That was the rest of the slot from Setanta. Eurosport looked at that when we're going fully behind a paywall. Eurosport is still going, and it's actually good quality broadcasting, and they rely less on presenters and studios than the others. But we'll see what happens with the TV deals. Why am I a fan of the Winnipeg Jets? My dad was in the British military. My dad was in the British Army, and he would go to Canada a lot with training exercises. And when I was a kid, we had cable. So we had every channel you could think of. We had every British channel, every American channel, every Canadian channel. We had every sports channel in the English language going. I could even pick up Australian sport. And my dad, being a massive sports fan himself, and an ex non-league football player as well as other things, my love of sport came from there. And of course, Dale Howardchuk and Teemu Selanne as well. That was the original Jets. And they went to Arizona, which will explain that. And then, I ended up becoming a Jets fan. And when they went back to Winnipeg, I, was happy with that. But I've always liked the Jets. So, it is what it is. I've always liked the Coyotes as well. So they're my 2 teams, really. I like Vegas because they're different, they're new. But it is what it is. I like the underdog too. I'm a massive underdog fan. If you look at the jersey I'm wearing, this is when the Capitals were really bad. So I always like underdogs. And when I was a little kid growing up, at the age of 3 or 4, you had Teemu Selanne and Dale Howardchuk playing. So I had 2 Hall of Famers playing on the team as well. So it's always interesting. But I've always had a soft spot for him, and I continue to do so. And I'm going to continue being a fan for as long as I live. There you go. The 3 p.m. TV rights in the UK is a joke. Absolutely, it's oversaturated. How many 3 o'clock kickoffs are there? You don't need that many games. I think. I don't know how long the current structures are going to last, but with what's happened with the EFL and what they've come out and said, and this is what this is talking about the NHL. This is what the NHL want, is a better TV deal in the US. A lot of these 3 p.m. kickoffs and Friday night games and the Monday night game, that's there for the overseas audience. And this is where I think domestic fans are being taken for a ride, and they're just not happy with it anymore. Games are being rescheduled for TV slots, and the fans are getting pissed off, and rightly so, because on a late evening kickoff on a Friday, how are these fans, especially the away fans, getting home? Especially if, let's say, it's Newcastle versus Bournemouth. how are the away fans getting home? I mean, it's it's stupid. We saw with the Challenge Cup at the weekend on a bank holiday weekend how half empty Wembley was, and that's rugby league. Did they learn nothing from last year with Catalan? Um, they're changing kickoff times for the FA Cup final, the Challenge Cup final, so other sports to suit the overseas sports market. And most normally, when they change a kickoff time in football, it's for the Asian market and the North American market, primarily the US East Coast. It's bizarre, it's stupid, and fans have rightly across the board in all leagues had enough. The fans are always put last, and I haven't been to a Premier League game for nigh on 15 years now. I used to go and watch Blackburn away at, let's say, clubs like Reading or Southampton or Portsmouth. I used to try and catch a Blackburn away game because for me to go from Berkshire, just west of London, up to Ewood Park is not feasible. I did try and do it a couple of times while I was at, sixth form college, but it's just not feasible over a weekend. I've spent half the weekend travelling. It's just, and the cost involved. What the people in charge of the FA and the Premier League and the EFL don't realise is the actual travel cost involved. If you're going, let's say Carlisle, Plymouth, there you go. There's an away game. There's an away game for you. Or Exeter playing, I don't know, I've got to think of the team now. Hartlepool in the FA Cup. Let's go for one of the biggest away days you could possibly have in football. The travel cost, the travel time. The amount of time you'll spend traveling. That's before food and drink. That's before possibly getting a hotel for the night. Some of my friends have done. That's a long day, especially on a Friday night. Friday night, Andrew Luck, injury prone, but some of the abuse he's faced online is pretty disgusting. I'm not a massive NFL fan. I'm not pretending that I am. I will cover. I've covered the NFL for like the London series and the Super Bowl. I've covered that on the channel, but I think the abuse he's received online is absolutely disgusting. Um, I don't understand it. I do not understand the abuse. I mean, he's decided to retire for his own health. He says rehabbing was too difficult for the injuries that he's had. People go, he's a whiny millennial snowflake, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then have multiple shoulder and knee and ankle and neck injuries. Just try it. I mean, I know how hard it is to rehab from a shoulder and neck injury because I nearly lost use of my left arm. I'm lucky to still have a fully usable left arm. I nearly had to have a shoulder reconstruction over the last couple of years. It's not a pleasant experience being out of work and being unable to do basic things like dress yourself. You have to look. Well, the Boots weren't. No, the Indianapolis Colts are they're not as bad as the Detroit Lions, I suppose, but American sports fans can be like this. It's a shame. Every fan base is like this. There's a minority in every fan base that are pretty classless. There are some teams that are worse than others across the board in a variety of sports. But I would say unnecessary. He's put his heart and soul into that team since he was drafted, and injuries have ended his career. It happens to a lot of great players. The fact he wasn't, his name is ironic in the surname of Luck, but I've been following it on Twitter for the last couple of days. I think it's pretty disgusting behaviour, but we're seeing it more and more in the last couple of years that so-called fans think it's their right to abuse players for their sexual orientation, the colour of their skin, their religious beliefs, or a variety of reasons. And it goes unchecked, and it's getting to a point now where it's toxic. And I think I feel sorry for individual athletes, and I feel sorry for certain players and certain teams. But I think it's wrong. I think if your body can't do it anymore, you have to think of your long-term health. There are plenty of players in a variety of sports who've had to retire young because their bodies just simply cannot take the abuse that they're put through. You look at rugby union, you look at rugby league, you look at ice hockey. The amount of abuse these physical sports take, football, even soccer, if you will. Dean Ashton's a prime example. He retired very young. His ankle was rebuilt like 3 times. It was destroyed. He could barely walk. I think he retired at the age of 25, 26. Michael Owen's career was derailed by knee injuries. I mean, you have to think about their post-career life, and a lot of people don't seem to care about what happens to these athletes when they retire and the agony they're in. Um, and the NFL has a big player welfare issue with looking after its players when they retire. They get paid big money, but that doesn't mean that with the way the US is with medical costs, that a player's going to have that money when he's 50. A lot of medical bills and kids' medical bills and mortgages and you know, a whole host of other things. The Bobby Duncan situation, I don't have enough knowledge on that to really pass comment. I think it'd be wrong of me to pass comment on that. But the Andrew Luck one, I think I feel sorry for him. I do. You know, his career didn't go as well as he would have wanted anyway on the success on the field, but he's playing in one of the most brutal leagues and brutal sports in the world. The problem with the NFL is not its brutality, because the NFL players refuse to play rugby without their pads because they're scared of getting hurt. It's the player welfare, and this is a league that has massive issues with player discipline. You have to look at the amount of players who have indiscretions of illegal kind off the field, domestic violence, drug problems, various issues of misconduct. The NFL has a big PR problem in that regard compared to other sports, and the welfare of its players is a big concerning point that the NFL, I don't think, does enough on. I don't think it does enough to address the welfare concerns, and Andrew Luck is a symptom of the situation. The abuse he's receiving is wrong, but he's got to think of his health, his long term health. If these injuries are going to be, you know, a hindrance to his health going forward, he's got to think of himself and his family and his future career and whatever he decides to go into. But the NFL is one of those sports that does have a poor record when it comes to player welfare post retirement and looking after. It's the helmet. Oh, absolutely. I look at rugby league and rugby union, ice hockey to a point. They are actively putting rules in place to, you know, sanction against hits to the head, lengthy suspensions, changing rules to protect head contact, prevent head contact, or if it is unpreventable, at least mitigate the injuries. But concussion protocols have got to be stricter. I think a lot of these sports, while they have these HIA assessments or concussion protocols in place, if a player is deemed to have not been fit enough to re-enter the field or of play or the ice surface, I think there should be a minimum stand down period of like 6 to 8 weeks. I've had concussion. I know how serious it can be, how ill you feel afterwards, and how long it can take to recover. And sometimes concussion symptoms can creep up on you, and take hours, if not days, to suddenly you have the symptoms of what is a concussion. I think the NFL is obviously the CTE lawsuit and the damage that's done to the NFL's reputation. And they're not the only sport to go through this, but I do think that the tackle technique is poor. Players have had career-ending injuries like that. But yeah, the tackle technique is a concern. The contact area is a concern, and I'm saying this from an ice hockey, rugby league, sort of rugby union fan point of view, as these are my favourite sports. I'm saying it from that kind of point of view, that they seem to be ahead of the curve to a certain extent. I think the NHL and ice hockey needs to improve their head injury protocol assessments and be a little bit better, as they're also coming under fire under the CTE lawsuit. But the NFL, I don't think, does enough for its player welfare. There's a whole host of issues where it could be massively better, from mental health to recovery period from injuries, to supporting players if they've had to retire because of injury, to assessing them independently. I think there's a massive issue. A good film to watch in relation to the NFL, and I know it's fiction, is The Last Boy Scout. It's a great film to watch, and the beginning of the film is a very dark moment. But some of the things, you know, oh yeah, Mr. Goodell. I'm not a fan of Roger Goodell at all. I think I hate him more than Gary Bettman of the NHL as a commissioner of a sport or a guy who's the face of a sport's governance. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Roger Goodell. Not a lot of people are, but he's presiding over the NFL at a big juncture in its history and the direction it's going to take. You've got to look at the fact that the CTE lawsuit has been a dominating feature of his tenure as commissioner. There's been a whole host of player indiscretions. It's going to be interesting to see the direction the NFL takes in the coming weeks and years and months. There's a lot of issues with the NFL's got to face up to. Substance abuse is one of them, and that's I think a lot of professional sports need to face up to the issues of substance abuse. I don't think professional sport as a grouping of leagues and sports and athletes are doing enough on substance abuse, and the NFL is one of those leagues that has a massive problem with substance abuse, massive problem, and NHL as well. There's been a few off-the-record remarks by current and ex-players in both leagues suggesting that recreational drugs and prescription medication are being regularly abused, and there's also references to the testing regime being very, very poor and very lax. I know in the NHL there's only 2 compulsory tests per year on a player, once in preseason and in training camp, and once in the regular season. Any other test after that will be random and not expected. But the NHL only demands 2 tests per season, and they're normally done within the first few weeks of the season. Once in training camp pre-season and once at the beginning of regular season. After that, they may, if there's a suspicion, come into a team dressing room for testing all the players. But it's they don't test if you're injured, if you're on injured reserve, and they don't test you if you're suspended for foul play on the ice, for example, in the NHL. So yes, there are massive holes in the testing regime, and this is the Evgeny Kuznetsov, Alexander Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, who plays for these guys, the Capitals. He was caught, obviously, at the IIHF World Championships in Slovakia at the end of May on the 26th, not long after a suspicious video appeared of him in a Vegas hotel room with a suspicious white powder, most likely cocaine, on the table, and a woman who wasn't his wife in the bed. And this is when Vegas were playing at home against the Capitals. He was caught on the 26th of May. He was provisionally suspended on the 13th of June and actually suspended a few days ago. The fact it took 3-4 months for a suspension to take place from World Championship competition and Olympic competition says a lot. Whether he's actually suspended by the NHL, whether he's on the injured reserve while he's undergoing treatment on the wellness program is something that we'll have to wait and see. But I wouldn't be surprised if the NHL just says he misses 20-30 games of the season, goes through this procedure of going through the rehabilitation program. But the NHL has a habit of throwing players on the bus who admit to a drug problem, or an alcohol problem, or a prescription meds problem. You have to look at Bob Probert. You have to look at Grant Fuhr. If you want to go back to the 80s and the 90s on that one, and I'm showing my age a little bit here. But no, professional sport as a whole has an issue with recreational and prescription drug misuse. I look at rugby league and rugby union. There's been some high-profile cases in those sports, football as well. The NFL and NHL have had their fair share. Cricket's had allegations of players doing things they shouldn't. Sports like that, the testing regimes clearly aren't strict enough. But also there's an issue with is the right help being made available, and is it who's the greatest sport athlete? That's an interesting one. I don't. That's subjective. It's a very subjective question. It's a very subjective situation to ask yourself who's the best athlete of all time, and that does. I know we're looking at a whole variety of sports, from track and field to box. Yeah, I wouldn't say Muhammad Ali. I think Muhammad Ali was the biggest ego, the greatest ego in sports. Absolutely, Muhammad Ali would be up there. Serena Williams, no, she's the biggest temper tantrum going. And probably one of the most disrespectful athletes out there, who uses her gender and her race to get round things by playing the race and the sex card, which doesn't, for me, endear me to her. Wayne Gretzky, if we're talking about ice hockey, he's not the greatest athlete. He's not the greatest physical specimen. Greatest player, yes. It's an interesting one. I would say greatest sportsman. You could look at Pele in football. You could look at Jorginho, who's the only player to score in every game in the World Cup final. Wayne Gretzky, absolutely the best goal scorer and points producer in ice hockey history. But then you could look at Gordie Howe, Mr. Hockey. You could. Oh, that's my phone going off. You could look at a whole host of. Oh, shut up, phone. Shut up, phone. Stupid thing. Um, there's a whole host of various names you could throw out there. You could put any number of athletes or sports stars out there. For all the ones you have mentioned, Michael Jordan, all of them were very, very photogenic in the sense that you could sell a brand with them, you could advertise with them, you can, they've got a big brand in themselves. But all of them have a bit of controversy surrounding them in their careers. At some point, Wayne Gretzky's been linked to a betting ring with his former teammate Rick Tocchet and his wife. There's allegations of match fixing or gambling. Michael Jordan, while yes, you can sell, Air Max Jordans still sell for several $100s in the US. He's long since retired. Wayne Gretzky's has been retired for 20 years. Muhammad Ali has now passed away. You could say Ayrton Senna in F1, but then you could look at Alan Prost as his rival. You could say Niki Lauda, James Hunt, their rivalry in the 70s. I think it's a very subjective question you're asking there when it comes to the greatest sports star of all time. It is subjective, and I think each person will come with a different answer. For pure talent, all of them in their various fields are the best. There is no doubt. Maybe in basketball, there's a LeBron James, Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant. There's some equals for Michael Jordan in basketball. Boxing, Muhammad Ali, but then you got George Foreman and fighting Joe Frazier, and then you got Mike Tyson. Lennox Lewis, Audley Harrison. There's a whole host of heavyweights that you could say, are they better than? And Muhammad Ali, I think, was possibly the biggest ego that boxing's ever had. Whether you would have a character like him today in the sport, does the sport need a character like that? Absolutely. Boxing is a sport that's got problems. It does need a figure like a Muhammad Ali or a George Foreman now more than it ever did. Serena Williams, very divisive player. Wayne Gretzky, nearly Mr. Squeaky Clean, although there's some rumours circulating about Wayne Gretzky. But he's been 20 years out of the sport. You could say that there are some equals to him now. But you have to look at the era that they competed in. And Wayne Gretzky's era is a lot different to the modern NHL era that we're in now. Goal scoring, it was easier to score goals. It was easier to get assists. It was easier to get points. If Wayne Gretzky was to play now, would he have been as effective as he was 20, 30 years ago? That's an interesting question. He's not. But here's the thing about Wayne Gretzky: he didn't win the most Stanley Cups. There are players who won more Stanley Cups than him. So, on a player success level, while he's got all the individual accolades of the various individual trophies that a player can win in the NHL, he hasn't won as many Stanley Cups as other players. So that's an interesting one. And a lot of people. The controversial part of his career was his trade to the LA Kings, and you can look at that trade and go the trade, and people know what you mean in the ice hockey circles. But you could look at the trade to LA. Should he have stayed at the Oilers? They couldn't afford him, but was that the wrong team to go to, or did it benefit ice hockey as a sport? I think it benefited ice hockey as a sport. I have not heard any news about Swindon, but I'm assuming you're going to tell me, Casey. I'm assuming there's going to be something you want to say in the comment section. I'll have to debate it with you. But I haven't really been on social media much the last couple of days, busy with work. So, and I had issues yesterday with YouTube. There were issues with uploading videos. There was a massive fault on the YouTube platform. So. It'd be interesting. But what have you got to say about Swindon? I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. Concerning the Swindon Wildcats, what is the news? Come on. Although I'm going to quickly check to confirm what you are discussing, but I haven't really been on social media much. Oh dear, off-ice injuries happen. It's players getting injured in pre-season uh, and things like that. It does happen. It's an occurrence. It's unfortunate. He The thing is, they haven't had to play with him yet, so whether that disrupts the chemistry of the team is going to be interesting. The pre-season for the National League doesn't start for a couple of weeks, so if it happened while um, if that happened while in the middle of a season, then yes, it's a massive, massive loss. It's a massive disruption. It's happened in pre-season training, um, therefore you can get a temporary reprieve to get another import in, depending on the length of injury. But it's a massive shame to lose a player that you've just signed, that you want to get ingratiated with the teammates, build a relationship with his teammates, get him ready for a season, and then he gets injured. It happens though. It's something that is frustrating, especially at lower levels of sport when the budgets are smaller and getting replacements is difficult and can be expensive. It will be a blow considering that they would have planned to have used him in a as a key member of that team. But we'll have to see what happens, whether they are giving dispensation to get another import or whether they can, play with just the one import and see how that goes. But it happens. Unfortunately, injuries are part of professional sport. They happen. Uh, we'll have to see how that affects the team and how that affects him when he does come back, what type of injury it is, how he's injured himself. And a couple of weeks is not that bad. So it's not as if he's out for a couple of months. That would have been more serious. So a couple of weeks is not the end of the world. It just means that when he does come back to playing fitness, he's possibly going to take a little while to get going. Obviously, that's not ideal, but again, it's how his teammates adapt to the situation is how it is really. But thankfully, it hasn't happened in season. I think that would have had more of an impact on the team than at this stage in August. And a couple of weeks isn't that bad because the first preseason game is a week and a half away. He should be right to go by the start of the season, I think, if it's only a couple of weeks. But it's losing that match fitness and that match readiness as well. I think that's something that a lot of people fail to realise is at the lower levels of sport, injuries are more keenly felt by teams because of the cost of getting replacements in. Again, I haven't really been on social media much. The last couple of days, busy with work, and I've not been well myself, so I've sort of been in and out of social media. Really, I've been more just generally relaxing and getting back to work and sorting things out with work. But yeah, absolutely, it is a loss, but at the same time, it's preseason training, not a preseason match. Injuries happen, especially when you're in a sport where budgets are tight and getting a replacement is difficult. It happens. It will have some impact, but at the same time, it means a young player might get a call up from the second string team and get a chance to prove himself with the main team, and so therefore it's a silver lining. A young player will be given an opportunity to get some ice time and play some games as cover and gain some valuable experience and exposure at the higher level. So it is what it is, but I'm looking forward to the preseason games on the 7th and 8th. I am looking forward to them. I think it's going to be fun. I think there'll be a bit of spice in there, and we'll have to see what happens. But I'm looking forward to it. The pre-season games between Swindon and Bracknell have been good over the last couple of years. Good crowds as well, good atmosphere, and some good quality play to boot. And yes, there has been some fights and some line brawls, and it's had its spicy moments. So, but we've got a few days to wait yet, and so Unforeseen. That's something that it's probably a non-sport related injury. It's happened to a few players over the years. It just basically means it wasn't expected. It wasn't like a training based injury or a sports based injury, which means it's happened in the home or in the work or out in the street. He's tripped and fallen, for example, done his knee ligaments, twisted an ankle, something like that. It does happen. It happens to even the best athletes who are the top of their game in on big money in top professional leagues. It's happened. It's frustrating if you're the fan. It's frustrating if you're the player. It's frustrating if you're his teammate. But at the end of the day, bumps and bruises happen. If it says a couple of weeks, it's not that serious. It's just a bit of rest the injury, let it heal, get back into light training, and then go from there. It basically means when he plays his first game, he's going to be a little bit rusty and not quite up to speed of the other players, be it his teammates or the opposition. But once you get into your stride, you pick things up, you pick up your match fitness, and then you're playing at your best. I will say this: in the contact sports such as rugby union, rugby league, ice hockey, players are never 100% fit anyway. They're always carrying a little niggle here or there, or a sore back, or a sore knee, or a sore elbow. They're always carrying some little niggle. No player is 100% fit throughout their career. Even if they don't have injury layoffs, players will be feeling stiff, tired. You know, they might be playing with an injury, even if it's a slight tweak or a slight, a dead leg. They will play on. So, again, it's something that the team are going to have to absorb. And if it does have a massive impact, if they've really set up as he's one of their key imports, they've set up to play in a certain way, and he's out, then um, well, injury replacements. It is in the rules. You can have a replacement import if the import's injured, and there is precedent for it. But I don't think they'll have to go down to that kind of situation. I don't think it will come to that. If it was a long term injury layoff, then absolutely, there's a few free agents flying about who pay to play, willing to play for a couple of months. But there is precedent for the import replacement rule. But I highly doubt if the statement's released in a couple of weeks pre-season. I mean, the regular season doesn't start till later on in September anyway. He'll be ready by the regular season. And pre-season, do you want to wrap your players in cotton wool? Hockey players are going to go full throttle regardless. They're going to want to put in big hits, and you can't go in half-hearted into challenges in contact sports like ice hockey. You just can't. You go in for a body check half-hearted, you're probably going to get injured. So when he comes back, he might be a bit off the pace for a couple of games, might be a little bit rusty. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's a good player for the level that we're playing at. He's got good vision. He's got good puck handling skills. Well, there you go. I think, yeah, you know, he, some players, I think, when they retire, they get restless and then they come out of retirement. We've seen that a few times again, precedent. But when you've had a career that long, you're going to have picked up a few niggles that are going to be concerns. And when you take some time out of the game to then come back in, those niggles can become more serious. So the Berrier's side of things, while he is a good player again for the level that he's played at, and the fact he was drafted by an NHL team, he was drafted by the Devils, I believe, back in the day. He was a Devils draft pick. He's had a long career. He's a very physical player. You look at the penalty minutes he's got and the amount of games he's played. Your body's gonna start feeling that at his age. But we'll see if he gets picked up as an injury cover for a team. It's possible. It's possible. But you just have to wait and see on that one. I think ice hockey as a sport is one of those sports where, as I say, players are never 100% fully fit. They always pick up little bumps and bruises. There's sore knees, sore elbows, shoulders, back. There's always a niggling injury with a player. They're never 100% fully fit. But we'll just have to see how the preseason goes. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But it is what it is. hockey players, they get injured, and at the lower levels, at the lower levels of the sport, um, where some players are part time or have that secondary income, they're going to get injured. I mean, we've seen players get injured outside of the game. I know the Bracknell Bees have had that. Scotty Spearing, when he was playing, had a nasty head injury at work and couldn't play for a while. And I think that's contributed to his retirement from the game, from playing. There comes a point where the injuries start racking up for some players and their body starts feeling it and they have to call it a day. And that debate about player welfare is a big thing in a lot of sports. And I think, yes, a lot of sports can do a lot better with player welfare and making sure that players are looked after when they retire and players, are given that support as well. But we'll have to see what happens in the regular season, as I say. I mean, there's some really interesting things. We've got the Leeds Chiefs making their debut season, and that's going to be fun watching, see how they play when they do play down in the south on some of their away games. That's going to be fun to watch, see how they play and how they get a team together and how competitive they are and how quickly they can build an identity. That's going to be fun to watch, and the Continental Hockey League competition starts this weekend. The Cardiff Devils are playing on Friday. I think there's some more games coming up over the weekend, so that's going to be fun to watch as well. And a lot of American fans are surprised that we're having our professional hockey seasons start a month earlier than they are. It's not surprising to us. We're used to it. It is what it is. The way the fixturing's done it, it is what it is. Right. Anyway, I'm going to call that stream a day. Interesting questions, a lot of interesting topics. Obviously, we started with the discussion over Bury and Bolton and the situation with Bury being thrown out the Football League and Bolton on the verge of getting thrown out the Football League. That's going to be interesting to see what happens and going forward. And the EFL have said that they're going to review what happened at Bury to make sure lessons are learned so it doesn't happen again. But I would say that it shouldn't have happened in the first place. The EFL and the FA and to a certain extent the Premier League need looking at how they're run, how they're governed, the transparency of the organisations, the their involvement with the governance of the game, and how clubs run, and the whole thing needs to be reviewed personally. But there we go. I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for taking part, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.